The mansion was silent except for the sound of rain brushing against the glass windows. Lightning flickered over the marble floors, revealing a man who had everything money could buy, but nothing his heart truly wanted. Alexander Reed, a self-made billionaire, was known for his sharp eyes, colder heart, and an empire that bent to his will. But that night, he wasn't thinking about mergers or stock prices. He was thinking about her, the quiet maid who never once looked him directly in the eyes. Her name was Emma. She'd been working in the house for 6 months, and unlike the other staff who tried to impress or gossip about the billionaire, Emma stayed in her lane, gentle, shy, and always respectful. She spoke only when spoken to, moved silently through rooms like a whisper of peace, and somehow managed to make every space she touched feel alive. But Alexander was not used to being ignored. He'd noticed her calmness, her humility, the way she never took advantage of kindness. He'd also noticed her eyes, soft brown, always lowered, yet carrying the kind of sadness that even his billions couldn't understand. One evening, after another exhausting day of board meetings and fake smiles, Alexander came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, most staff already gone. Only Emma remained, finishing her duties in the living room, folding blankets and tidying up the fireplace. He stood there for a long moment, watching her silently. Something about her steadiness tugged at a part of him he'd long buried, the part that remembered how to feel. On impulse, he decided to test something, a foolish, human curiosity he couldn't explain. He sat on the couch, pretending to be asleep, eyes closed, breathing slow. He wanted to see how this simple, quiet girl behaved when no one was watching. Would she act differently? Would she sneak, or gossip, or ignore him completely? He didn't know what he expected. But he didn't expect what actually happened. Emma finished her cleaning and turned to leave, but paused. She looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time since she started working there. For a long moment, she just stood there, studying the man everyone in the city feared or envied. Then, quietly, she walked toward him, her steps slow and hesitant. Alexander kept his eyes closed. She knelt near the couch, gently adjusted the blanket that had slipped from his shoulder, and then did something that froze him completely. She whispered softly, "You must be so lonely." Her voice trembled, full of compassion. "Everyone calls you powerful, but no one sees how tired you are. I see it. Even when you smile at others, your eyes never smile with you." She paused, and he could hear the faint catch in her breath. "I wish someone would take care of you the way you take care of the world." She reached out, brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead, and then, so lightly it almost wasn't there, placed her hand over his. "You remind me of my father," she whispered. "He worked until his heart gave up. He thought love was a weakness too." Then she stood, quietly gathering her things, and left the room. Alexander didn't move for a long time. His chest felt tight, as though her words had unlocked a door inside him that had been locked for years. That night, for the first time in decades, he couldn't sleep. The image of her gentle eyes and that quiet voice played over and over in his mind. The next morning, he called his assistant and canceled all meetings. The staff whispered in confusion, "Mr. Reed never canceled meetings." He searched for Emma, finally finding her in the kitchen, quietly washing dishes. She froze when she saw him. "Emma," he said softly. "Can we talk?" She nodded nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need to ask you something," he said, his tone different, softer, almost uncertain. "Last night, I was awake. I heard what you said." Her face turned pale. "Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." He raised a hand gently. "Don't apologize. You told me the truth when no one else dared to. And, you were right." She looked up then, surprised. "For years I've surrounded myself with people who only see what I own. Not who I am. You saw something I didn't even want to see myself." She bit her lip, unsure what to say. "Tell me," he continued quietly, "why did you say those things? Why care about someone like me?" Emma hesitated. "Because I know what loneliness looks like. I grew up watching my father work himself to death to give us a better life. He used to sit in the same chair every night, pretending everything was fine, when inside he was falling apart. When I saw you, I saw that same exhaustion. And I just couldn't ignore it." For the first time in years, Alexander didn't know how to respond. He wasn't the billionaire now. He was just a man, stripped of pride, standing in front of a girl who'd seen through his armor. "Emma," he said finally, "if my father had someone like you around, maybe he would have learned to rest." Days passed, and something in the mansion began to change. Alexander started eating breakfast with the staff, something he'd never done before. He began to smile. A real, quiet smile that reached his eyes. He asked Emma to take charge of redecorating the greenhouse, saying he wanted to bring life back to the house. They spent hours there, surrounded by sunlight and growing things. She taught him how to plant herbs. He listened to her stories about small dreams, a house near the sea, a life without worry. Slowly, without either of them noticing, the wall between billionaire and Maid began to crumble. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, she noticed his hands, calloused despite the wealth. "You work too hard," she said gently. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "Not anymore. Not since someone reminded me I'm human." She blushed, turning away to hide her smile. Months passed, and word spread that Alexander Reed, the once feared tycoon, had become softer, kinder. The media speculated about new charity foundations and his sudden absence from high-profile parties. No one knew that the change began the night a shy maid spoke the truth he didn't want to hear. Then, one evening, he found Emma sitting alone in the garden, staring at the stars. "You're quiet tonight," he said, sitting beside her. "I was thinking," she replied softly. "My contract ends next month. I'll be leaving soon." He froze. "Leaving?" She nodded. "I've saved enough to start the little bakery I always dreamed of." "You've already done so much for me, sir. It's time I take the next step." He looked at her, and for the first time in his life, Alexander didn't know how to let go. "Emma," he said quietly, "you've done something no one else ever could. You reminded me what it feels like to live. I don't want to stop feeling that." She smiled sadly. "You'll keep feeling it, because it was already inside you. You just needed to see it." The words struck deep. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he took a deep breath. "If I asked you to stay, not as a maid, but as someone I could trust, maybe as someone more, would you consider it?" Her eyes widened. "Sir." He shook his head gently. "Not as your boss. As a man who doesn't want to lose the only person who ever saw him clearly." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "I don't belong in your world. Then I'll come into yours," he whispered. Silence filled the garden, broken only by the sound of wind in the trees. She didn't answer, but her hand trembled as she placed it over his, the same way she had that night when he pretended to sleep. From that moment, life didn't change overnight, but it grew quietly beautiful. The mansion was no longer just walls and wealth. It was laughter, warmth, and the smell of freshly baked bread from the new kitchen she managed. Alexander found peace in ordinary things. Morning coffee, shared glances, the sound of her humming as she worked. He had tested her once, and in doing so, she had tested him far deeper, forcing him to see that true wealth wasn't in his fortune, but in kindness, in honesty, in love that asked for nothing in return. Years later, when people spoke about Alexander Reed, they still called him a billionaire. But those who knew him closely called him something else, the man who finally learned how to feel. And whenever someone asked him how, he would simply smile and say, "Because someone once cared enough to tell me the truth."